The cold seeped through the hospital sheets first, then through my skin until it reached somewhere deeper, a place I hadn't known could freeze. Nathan's voice drifted from the hallway, low and careful, the way people speak when they think walls will muffle their cruelty. She's been like this for weeks. The doctors say there's no improvement. Maybe we should start considering. Don't. My sister Elena's voice cut through, sharp with something that might have been concern if I didn't know better. Not yet. The insurance hasn't processed everything. I wanted to laugh. Even now, as whatever was left of me clung to this broken body, they were calculating. The pneumonia had come quickly after the accident. The one that wasn't really an accident. The one that happened after I'd worked 70 hours that week to pay for Nathan's mother's surgery, after I'd driven home in the rain because Elena needed the good car for her gallery opening. The heart monitor's beep seemed slower than it had yesterday. Or maybe I was just noticing it more now that I understood what it meant, that each space between sounds was my life stretching thinner, becoming something that could break with a whisper. She always was fragile. Nathan's voice again, closer now, just outside my door. I told her she couldn't handle the pressure. Remember when I said she'd fall apart without me to keep her grounded? I hate being right about these things. The worst part wasn't the words. It was the tone, casual, almost bored, as if my dying was just another tedious thing he had to endure, like traffic or a delayed flight. Elena murmured something I couldn't hear. They were probably standing close, the way they'd been standing close for months before I'd noticed, before I'd pretended not to notice, because acknowledging it would mean confronting a truth I wasn't ready to hold. The door opened. Footsteps approached my bed. 2 sets, moving in sync like they'd choreographed this. Still nothing? Nathan's hand touched my forehead, clinical and cold. She can't even hear us. The neurologist said the brain activity is minimal. I heard everything, every word, every breath, every lie. Do you think she knew? Elena's voice was soft, almost gentle, the way she used to sound when we were children, and she'd comfort me after our mother praised her report card and forgot to ask about mine. About us? Silence stretched. Then Nathan sighed. Does it matter now? Look at her. This isn't living. She was always so dependent, so needy. I tried to help her become stronger, but some people just aren't built for independence. My heart monitor's rhythm faltered. A nurse would come soon, adjust something, extend this a few more hours. But I was tired. So tired of being the weight they carried, the burden they endured, the fragile thing that couldn't survive without someone's reluctant mercy. Elena's hand found mine. Her fingers were warm. I'm sorry, she whispered, and I think she meant it, which somehow made it worse. You deserved better than this. Better than us. The admission arrived too late to matter, wrapped in the past tense like I was already gone. Maybe I was. The beeping slowed further. The cold spread. Nathan's voice came from farther away now, or maybe I was sinking deeper into myself, into the quiet place where sound became texture and words became colours I couldn't name. We should call her parents. Elena's voice rippled through the growing dark. They'll want to say goodbye. But they wouldn't come. They were in Greece with Elena's graduation money, celebrating her acceptance to the prestigious program I'd helped fund by working double shifts at the firm. They'd sent a text 3 days ago. Hope you feel better soon, sweetheart. The Aegean is beautiful. Elena says you'd love it here. Elena hadn't told them I was dying. Neither had Nathan. They'd decided I'd want them to enjoy their trip, that I wouldn't want to worry them, that it was what I would have chosen if I could choose anything. They decided for me, the way they'd always decided for me, parceling out my life in pieces small enough for me to manage. The machine's rhythm stretched longer between beats. A nurse rushed in. I heard the rubber soles squeaking against linoleum, heard her urgent voice calling for a doctor, heard Nathan say something about DNR orders that I'd never signed. "She would have wanted peace," he said, and his hand touched my shoulder like he was comforting me, like he was the good man bearing an unbearable burden with grace. The last thing I heard was Elena crying, soft and almost real, and Nathan's voice saying, "She just wasn't strong enough. I tried. God knows I tried." Then the sound stopped. The cold stopped. Everything stopped. And in that stopping, in that infinite pause between the last beat and the silence after, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Relief. The smell of jasmine and old books pulled me back first, then the sunlight warm against my eyelids, then the softness of cotton sheets that hadn't been washed thin by industrial hospital machines. I opened my eyes to my childhood bedroom. Not the sterile apartment Nathan and I had shared, not the hospital room with its machines and monitoring screens, but the small room in my parents' house with its slanted ceiling and the water stain shaped like a bird on the wall. My body felt different, lighter, stronger. I lifted my hand and it moved without the tremor that had developed over the last year, the one the doctor said came from stress and poor sleep and the anxiety medication that never quite worked. The clock on my nightstand read 7:34 a.m., June 15th. June 15th. 3 years before the accident. 4 years before the hospital. Back when Nathan and I had just started dating, when Elena was still in college, when I'd still believed that love meant sacrifice and family meant loyalty and strength meant enduring what hurt you. I sat up slowly, testing this new reality. The memories were all there, every moment of the life I'd lived, every choice that had led me to that hospital bed, every word Nathan had spoken as I died. But I was here, in this younger body, in this earlier time, with knowledge that felt like armor and a second chance that tasted like dawn. The morning light caught dust motes floating through the air, each one suspended in golden clarity. I remembered this room from before I'd moved in with Nathan, before I'd learned to apologize for taking up space, before I'd understood that my presence in his life was something he endured rather than celebrated. Everything was exactly as it had been. The books stacked on my desk, the ones Nathan would later tell me to donate because they made me seem pretentious. The running shoes by the door, the ones he'd convinced me to throw away because morning runs were making me too tired to focus on our relationship. The small painting I'd done in high school, the one he'd say was embarrassing, evidence of dreams I should have outgrown. All of it still here, still mine, still possible. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text from Nathan. "Good morning, beautiful. Can't wait to see you tonight. Wear the blue dress I like." I stared at the message, at the casual command dressed as affection, at the man who'd spent 3 years slowly teaching me that my preferences mattered less than his approval. The blue dress was new. I'd bought it with Elena 2 weeks ago, mentioned it once in passing. He'd immediately claimed it as his favourite, as if his approval was what gave it value, as if my body was a canvas for his aesthetic preferences rather than my own. In my first life, I'd worn the blue dress. I'd let him order my meal at the restaurant. I'd laughed at his jokes about my adorable helplessness and believed him when he said he liked taking care of me because I was special, not because he needed someone small enough to manage. My fingers hovered over the screen. In my first life, I'd replied immediately, eagerly, grateful that someone wanted me despite all my flaws, the ones he'd so carefully identified and catalogued. I deleted the message without responding. The face in my bathroom mirror was younger, unmarked by the stress lines that had settled around my mouth and eyes. 24 years old, bright, unbroken. But the person looking back at me was different. older in ways that had nothing to do with years. I touched my reflection, half expecting it to ripple like water, to reveal that this was just another dying dream. But the glass was solid and cool, and the girl in the mirror touched back with steady fingers that knew exactly what they were reaching for. Certainty. Downstairs, I heard my mother humming in the kitchen. The sound was so familiar it ached, not the distant, distracted humming from later years, when Elena's achievements had filled all the space in her attention, but the warm, present sound from before the comparisons had started, before I'd learned to make myself smaller, to give my sister room to shine. "Olivia!" Eleanor's voice called from her room. "Can you help me pick an outfit? I have that interview at the gallery today." The words were exactly the same as I remembered them. In my first life, I'd dropped everything. I'd spent 2 hours helping her choose and re-choose, making her coffee, calming her nerves, sacrificing my own morning so she could feel prepared. And at dinner that night, my parents had celebrated her success while I'd smiled and nodded, and said of course I was proud. Of course I didn't mind that they'd forgotten about my own interview that day, the one I hadn't gotten because I'd arrived late and flustered after running Elena's errands. That interview had been for a junior position at an international consulting firm. The job had gone to someone else, someone who'd arrived on time, who'd been composed and prepared, who hadn't spent the morning being someone else's support system. I told myself it didn't matter. Nathan had agreed, said it was probably for the best anyway, that the travel requirements would have been hard on our relationship, that I should focus on something more stable, more local, more manageable. I'd believed him because I'd wanted to believe that my smallness was strategy rather than surrender. I walked to Elena's door but didn't open it. "I have somewhere to be," I said through the wood, "but you'll be great. You always are." Silence. Then, carefully, "Oh, okay. Thanks, I guess." The confusion in her voice was its own small victory. I wasn't angry. Anger was too hot, too reactive. This was something colder and more permanent, a boundary drawn in stone where there had only been water. My mother found me in the kitchen, pouring coffee into a travel mug. "You're up early," she said, surprise evident in her tone. "I thought you'd help Elena this morning." "She doesn't need my help. She's perfectly capable." "Well, yes, but you always—" She stopped, catching something in my expression. "Is everything all right, sweetheart?" "Everything's fine. I just have things to take care of." She nodded slowly, uncertain how to navigate this version of her daughter, the one who said no, who moved with purpose, who didn't automatically dissolve her own plans to accommodate someone else's needs. I kissed her cheek and left before she could ask more questions, before I could be pulled back into the familiar choreography of self-erasure. I drove to the coffee shop downtown, the one I'd discovered years later when I'd needed a place to cry between the hospital and home. It was empty this early, quiet except for the hiss of the espresso machine and the low murmur of morning radio. The barista, a woman with silver hair and kind eyes named Dorothy, though I wouldn't learn her name until much later, smiled as I ordered. "You look like someone who just made a decision," she said. "Something like that. Good for you. Most people spend their whole lives avoiding those." I took my coffee to the corner table and opened my laptop, the one Nathan had told me to return, claiming I didn't need something so expensive, that I should save money for our future together. I'd kept it anyway, one of the few times I'd trusted my instinct over his guidance. The job posting was still there, waiting. Senior analyst position, international development firm. Travel required. In my first life, Nathan had convinced me not to apply. Too much time away, too demanding, too risky for someone with my limited experience. I'd believed him because I'd believed I needed believing in, and he'd positioned himself as the only one willing to provide it. I read through the requirements carefully. They wanted someone with analytical skills. I had those. someone who could work independently across multiple time zones. I could learn that. Someone who wasn't afraid of challenges that required adaptation and growth. I was already living proof of that. I submitted my application. Then I submitted 5 more to positions I'd never allowed myself to consider. Jobs that required confidence I'd been taught I didn't have. Skills I'd been convinced I couldn't develop. Independence Nathan had spent 3 years ensuring I'd never claim. Each application felt like an act of resurrection. Each keystroke was evidence that I was here, alive, choosing. My phone buzzed again. Nathan, are you ignoring me? Then, 2 minutes later, that's not like you. Is something wrong? Then, Olivia, I'm starting to worry. Please, respond. The progression was so familiar it was almost boring. First the sweetness, then the concern, then the subtle implication that my silence was somehow violent, that not responding was a form of emotional cruelty that made me the aggressor. In my first life, I'd apologized. I'd explained. I'd rushed to soothe his manufactured worry because I'd believed that managing his emotions was my responsibility, that his discomfort was proof of my failure. I turned off my phone and ordered another coffee. Dorothy brought it to my table herself, along with a blueberry muffin I hadn't requested. On the house, she said, for whatever you're starting. How do you know I'm starting something? Because endings and beginnings look the same from the outside, but you can tell the difference by watching someone's hands. She gestured to my laptop. Yours aren't shaking. That's a beginning. I wanted to ask how she knew, what she'd seen in her own life that let her recognize this moment in mine. But some understandings are too large for coffee shop conversations. So I just smiled and said, thank you, and returned to building my new life one application at a time. The interview call came 3 days later. The job offer came 2 weeks after that. Nathan had stopped texting after the first day, switching instead to showing up at my parents' house with flowers and confused, hurt in his eyes. I don't understand what I did wrong, he said on the porch, blocking the door with his body in a way that looked protective but felt threatening. We were fine, and then you just disappeared. Did someone say something about me? Because whatever it was, it's not true. No one said anything? Then what is this? You owe me an explanation, Olivia. After everything we've been to each other. We've been dating for 2 months, I interrupted. You don't know my favourite colour. You've never asked what I want to do with my life. You chose my clothes and my food and my free time, and I let you because I thought that was what love looked like. His face shifted, hurt melting into something sharper. I was taking care of you. You said you liked that I was decisive, that I made things easy. You're right. I did say that. I stepped back, preparing to close the door. I was wrong. You're making a mistake. His voice dropped, taking on the gentle, patient tone he used when explaining why my ideas wouldn't work. You think you're strong enough to be alone, but you're not. You'll see. You'll come back, and I'll forgive you because that's what people do when they love someone. But, Olivia? He leaned closer, his hand catching the door. Don't wait too long. My patience isn't infinite. There it was. The threat wrapped in concern, the prediction designed to become self-fulfilling prophecy. He was telling me I'd fail so that when things got hard, and they would get hard, I'd remember his words and believe they were wisdom rather than manipulation. I looked at him then, really looked, and saw what I'd been too young to recognize before. Not love, not even cruelty, but simple indifference wrapped in the language of devotion. I was a project to him, a thing to shape and manage, proof of his capacity for mercy towards something weak. Goodbye, Nathan. I closed the door. He stood on the porch for 20 minutes, waiting for me to reconsider, to apologize, to recognize my error. I watched him through the window. This man who'd convinced me I was too fragile to exist without his careful construction. When he finally left, his shoulders were tight with anger. He'd expected capitulation. He'd been certain that a few weeks without him would be enough to break me, to send me crawling back with apologies and promises to be better, to be less, to be manageable again. He didn't understand that I'd already been broken so thoroughly that I'd died from it. And then I'd come back, and breaking the same way twice was impossible when you'd already learned what lay on the other side of that particular destruction. Elena found me in the kitchen an hour later. Was that Nathan? It was. Did you break up with him? Mum's going to be upset. She thought he was good for you. Mum thought a lot of things. I poured tea steady and calm. She'll survive her disappointment. Elena sat across from me, studying my face with an expression I couldn't read. You're different lately, since that morning when you wouldn't help me get ready. I'm not different. I'm just done being convenient. That's not fair. I never asked you to. You didn't have to ask. I offered because I thought that's what sisters did, what good daughters did, what worthy people did. I met her eyes, but it turns out I was just making myself small enough to fit in spaces that were never mine. She looked away first. I don't know what you want me to say. I don't want you to say anything. I just want you to understand that things are changing. Because of a job? Because Nathan's gone? Because I died. The words came out quiet but firm. And then I came back. And I'm not wasting this second chance proving I can survive by diminishing myself. Eleanor's confusion was honest. She couldn't understand what I meant because she'd never lived it, never died from the slow erosion of being everyone's afterthought. But she nodded anyway, and something in her expression shifted. Not comprehension, but the beginning of it. I got that gallery position, she said after a moment. The interview went well. They offered it to me on the spot. That's wonderful. You'll be brilliant at it. I would have worn the wrong thing if you hadn't, she stopped, if I hadn't figured it out myself. You always would have figured it out. You just never had to because I was always there to figure it out for you. Are you saying I'm spoiled? I'm saying we both accepted roles that made sense when we were children. I'm just deciding that I've outgrown mine. She absorbed this slowly. Then, will you still be my sister, even if you're not the way you were? The question revealed more than she'd intended. She'd understood on some level that our relationship had been transactional, her need for support, my need to be needed. Take away the transaction, and what remained? I'll always be your sister, I said, but I won't always be your solution. She nodded, and I saw her seeing me for perhaps the first time. Not as a function or a resource, but as a separate person with boundaries and needs, and a life that existed independent of her convenience. It was a start. The international firm sent me to Singapore first, then to Geneva, then to Nairobi. Each city taught me something I'd needed to learn, that I could navigate foreign streets alone, that I could negotiate contracts without someone correcting my tone, that my instincts were worth trusting. Singapore taught me that competence builds itself through repetition, that each small success creates foundation for the next. I arrived terrified and left confident, having managed a project that would have seemed impossible months earlier. Geneva taught me that respect is something you claim rather than earn, that people respond to the energy you project about yourself. I stopped apologizing for my presence in meetings, stopped softening my opinions with qualifiers, stopped making myself digestible for men who were uncomfortable with female certainty. Nairobi taught me that growth requires discomfort, that the version of myself I was becoming could only emerge if I stopped clinging to the version I'd been. I made mistakes there, big ones, the kind that required humility and correction and learning. But I survived them, and survival built something stronger than perfection ever could. My parents were disappointed I'd turned down Nathan's eventual proposal, the one he'd issued 6 months after I'd closed the door, certain I'd crumbled in his absence, eager to prove I couldn't survive without his structure. The proposal had come via email, which should have told me everything I needed to know about his commitment. It was long, detailed, full of specific plans for our future that he'd made without my input. He'd already chosen the venue, the date, the honeymoon destination. He'd decided we'd live in his apartment, that I'd reduce my travel schedule, that children would come within 2 years. He'd built an entire life and invited me to occupy it, never once asking what I wanted, what I dreamed about, what I needed to feel whole. I'd sent a polite decline via email. His response had been long, wounded, and meticulously crafted to make me feel guilty for choosing myself. He'd listed everything he'd done for me, every sacrifice he'd made, every way he'd tried to help me become someone functional. The subtext was clear. I owed him. My existence in his life had been a favour he'd extended, and rejecting his proposal was evidence of ingratitude so profound it bordered on cruelty. I deleted it without finishing, and the freedom of that deletion had been its own kind of joy. Elena called sometimes, less frequently as months became years. The conversation was always slightly awkward, both of us navigating the new distance between us. She'd gotten engaged to a painter she'd met at the gallery, a quiet man named Tom, who seemed genuinely interested in her thoughts, who asked her questions and listened to the answers. He's nothing like Nathan, she told me once carefully, as if testing whether the name would detonate something between us. Good, I said, meaning it. Did you really love him? Nathan? I considered the question. Had I loved him, or had I loved being chosen? Had I loved him, or had I loved the story he told about us? The story where he was the hero rescuing someone too broken to rescue herself. I loved who I thought he was, I said finally. And I think he loved who he needed me to be. Neither of those people were real. Do you think he ever loved you? Actually loved you? I think he loved the idea of being the kind of man who could love someone like me. Someone he could fix and manage and point to as evidence of his goodness. I paused. But no, I don't think he ever loved me. I don't think he knew me well enough to. Elena was quiet for a long moment. Then, I'm sorry I didn't see it. When you were together, I should have said something. You couldn't have. I wouldn't have heard it. Are you happy? She asked me once during a rare visit home. I'm free, I said. Maybe that's better. She didn't argue. I met James in Geneva 3 years into my new life. He was a consultant for a sustainability project, brilliant and kind and completely unbothered by my competence. We had coffee, then dinner, then a year of slow, careful dating that felt nothing like the desperate attachment I'd once mistaken for love. James was everything Nathan wasn't, not in obvious ways, but in the subtle architecture of how he moved through the world. He asked questions and waited for answers. He changed his opinions when presented with new information. He apologized when he was wrong without making his apology into a request for absolution. Most importantly, he seemed to genuinely enjoy the person I was, rather than tolerate her while trying to reshape her into someone more convenient. You're guarded, he observed one evening, his fingers tracing the back of my hand. Like you're waiting for me to reveal that I'm something else. I'm just careful. Because someone taught you not to trust easily. Because I taught myself what trust costs. He accepted that, didn't push, didn't try to excavate my history like it was treasure he was owed. When I told him about Nathan, not about the rebirth, but about the relationship itself, he just listened, then said, he was afraid of you. Afraid? Of what you'd become without him controlling it. People like that need someone small to feel big. You must have terrified him when you started growing. It was the kindest interpretation of cruelty I'd ever heard, and maybe it was even true. James met my family during the holidays that year. My mother had warmed to me slowly, learning to navigate this version of her daughter who said no, who had boundaries, who didn't automatically sacrifice herself for others' comfort. My father had always been quieter, more accepting, and he welcomed James with genuine warmth. Elena and Tom were there too, and I watched my sister interact with her fiancé, the easy affection, the mutual respect, the way they consulted each other before making decisions. She'd learned something about partnership that I'd had to die to understand. "Your family is lovely," James said later as we drove back to the hotel. "They're learning how to love me without needing me to be small." "Were you always small with them?" "I was always whatever size fit best in the space they had available." He was quiet for a moment, processing this. Then, "And now?" "Now I'm my actual size. They're adjusting." "For what it's worth, I think your actual size is perfect." I leaned across the console and kissed him. This man who saw me clearly and didn't flinch, who loved my bigness instead of trying to manage it. 5 years after my rebirth, I returned to my hometown for my parents' anniversary party. The house was the same, the guests were the same, but I moved through it like a visitor from some other country. Present, but separate, warm, but untouchable. Nathan was there. Elena had apologized 3 times before the party. "I didn't know Mum invited him. He's dating her friend's daughter now. I can tell him not to come." "It's fine," I'd said, meaning it. "He's just a person. He doesn't have power I don't give him." He looked older, softer around the edges. The girlfriend beside him was young, maybe 22, quiet, with a nervousness in her smile that I recognized like a reflection from another life. She laughed at his jokes with too much enthusiasm and touched his arm constantly, as if anchoring herself to his approval. Her name was Lauren, and I watched Nathan correct her twice in the first 10 minutes, once about a date in history, once about the proper way to hold a wine glass. Small corrections, gentle in tone, designed to educate rather than humiliate, but corrections nonetheless, each one a subtle message that her knowledge was insufficient, that she needed his guidance to navigate the world properly. I remembered being Lauren. I remembered believing those corrections were love. Nathan saw me across the room and his expression froze. Surprise. Then something that might have been regret, then careful neutrality. "Olivia." He approached alone, leaving Lauren by the drinks table. "You look well." "Thank you." "I heard you've been travelling. Important work from what your mother says." "It's fulfilling." Silence stretched, he shifted his weight, uncomfortable in a way I'd never seen him. "I think about you sometimes. About us, about how things ended." "Do you?" "I was young. I thought I knew what you needed. I thought..." He stopped, searching for words. "I thought I was helping, making things easier for you." "You were making things easier for yourself," I said gently. "I was never hard to love, Nathan. I was just hard to control." His face tightened. "That's not fair. I cared about you. You wanted someone who'd be grateful for your mercy, someone who'd prove your goodness by accepting your management." I smiled. Not cruel, just honest. "I'm not angry. I'm just stating facts." "You've changed. I've grown. There's a difference." He looked at me, then like he was seeing something he'd lost, something valuable he'd thrown away, without recognizing its worth. "If I could go back..." "But you can't." I touched his arm briefly, a gesture without weight. "You should get back to Lauren. She looks nervous. She's young, still figuring things out. Then maybe you should let her figure them out without your constant guidance." He flinched at that, understanding the implication. "I'm not the same person I was with you." aren't you?" I glanced toward Lauren, who was watching us with barely concealed anxiety. "She's wearing the dress you chose. I can tell because she keeps adjusting it like it doesn't quite fit. You probably told her she looked beautiful in it, that it was perfect for this event, that you knew exactly what would make her feel confident." His silence was confirmation. "The thing about people like you, Nathan, is that you don't learn. You just find new people to practice the same patterns on. And eventually, she'll either break under the weight of being your project, or she'll grow strong enough to leave. Either way, you'll tell yourself the story where you were the hero trying to help someone too broken to be saved. That's not..." He stopped, seeing something in my expression that made arguing pointless. "I did love you. Maybe not well, but I loved you. You loved the version of me you created, but that person never existed. She was just a role I played until I couldn't anymore. And you're happy now? With everything you chose instead? Happier than I ever was pretending to be someone small enough for you to manage." I left him standing there and returned to James, who was talking with Tom and Elena by the windows. He handed me a glass of wine without breaking conversation, his arm settling naturally around my waist. The gesture was casual, unthinking, but it spoke of comfort and equality, a partnership where neither person was diminished to elevate the other. Nathan watched from across the room, and I saw the moment he understood what he'd lost. Not me specifically, but the possibility of me, the woman I'd become in his absence, the person who'd emerged when his influence was removed. He'd spend years telling himself I'd been lucky, that I'd stumbled into success, that my growth had nothing to do with his absence and everything to do with circumstances beyond his control. He'd need that story to survive the weight of his regret. I didn't need any story. I just needed to keep living. Later, on the porch, Elena joined me with 2 glasses of wine. That looked intense. It was just closure. "He's been asking about you, about whether you're happy, whether you've settled down." She paused. "I think he regrets losing you. He regrets losing his idea of me, the version he created. That person never existed." Elena sipped her wine, considering. "I owe you an apology for before, for not seeing how much you were carrying. You were young. We both were. But I let you carry me. Mom and Dad did too. And Nathan, God, Nathan built his whole identity around it." She looked at me with something like wonder. "How did you know to leave?" I almost told her then. About the hospital, about the cold, about Nathan's voice saying I'd never survive alone, about dying and waking and choosing different. But some truths are too strange to share, too precious to risk in the speaking. "I just realised that surviving wasn't the same as living," I said instead. She nodded slowly. "I'm proud of you. I don't think I've ever said that, but I am. You're the strongest person I know." The words landed soft, unexpected, like snow on warm ground. In my first life, I'd spent years hungry for that recognition. Now, having it, I found it didn't change anything fundamental. I hadn't become strong for anyone's approval. I'd become strong because the alternative was another kind of death. "Thank you," I said anyway, because grace costs nothing and kindness doesn't require need. We sat in comfortable silence, watching the party through the window. Inside, Nathan stood alone, Lauren having drifted away to talk with other guests. He looked lost, diminished somehow, like a person who'd built their entire identity on being needed and was now facing the absence of anyone who needed them. "Do you ever feel sorry for him?" Elena asked. "Sometimes. But pity isn't the same as regret. I don't regret leaving. I just regret that he never learned that loving someone means celebrating their size, not managing it." "Do you think he'll ever learn?" I don't know. I hope so for Lauren's sake, but I don't have to stay small to teach him that lesson. Elena raised her glass. To being our actual size. I clinked my glass against hers. To being our actual size. 7 years after my rebirth, James proposed on a rooftop in Barcelona. The ring was simple, the question straightforward. Will you build a life with me that doesn't require either of us to be small? I said yes because it was the easiest yes I'd ever spoken. We married in a small ceremony with people who'd chosen to know the real me, not the version I'd performed to earn belonging. Elena was there, softer now, less shiny, more substantial. My parents were there, confused but trying, learning slowly that love and attention aren't finite resources. Nathan wasn't invited. I'd heard through Elena that he'd broken up with Lauren, then dated 2 other women in quick succession, each relationship following the same pattern, intense devotion that curdled into disappointment when the woman developed opinions that contradicted his vision. He's lonely, Elena told me at the rehearsal dinner. He called last week, asked if you'd be willing to talk to him. He said he's been thinking about what you said at the party, about control and love. He wants to apologize. What did you tell him? That you'd moved on, that he should too. Good. James found me later, pulled me close on the quiet terrace. You went somewhere else just now, somewhere I can't follow. Just visiting an old life, making sure I left it behind. Did you? I kissed him, present and whole and certain, completely. The wedding itself was simple and joyful. Dorothy from the coffee shop came, bringing flowers from her garden and a card that read, "To beginnings that last." Tom and Elena danced together, easy and comfortable. My parents watched with something like wonder, still adjusting to this version of their daughter, who took up space without apologizing for it. James and I danced slowly as the sun set, painting everything amber and gold. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "How strange it is that the worst thing that ever happened to me led to the best thing." What was the worst thing? I almost told him. Almost explained about the hospital, the cold, the dying. But some truths are too complex for wedding days, so I just said, learning what I was worth. It hurt at the time, but I needed it. He accepted this, understanding that some stories have gates that open slowly, and that love means patience with the unfolding. 10 years after my rebirth, I received an email from an unfamiliar address. The subject line read, "I was wrong. I almost deleted it." Then, curiosity, or maybe mercy, made me open it. "Olivia, I don't expect a response. I'm writing because I need to say this, even if you never read it, even if you've forgotten me entirely. You were right. About everything. About control, about what I called love, about what I needed from you. I spent 10 years thinking I was the wounded party, the good man who'd been abandoned by someone too broken to appreciate my help. I told that story to everyone, to my girlfriends, to my family, to myself. But last year, I started therapy. Not by choice. My last girlfriend left and said I needed professional help if I ever wanted a real relationship. I went angry, ready to prove she was wrong. Instead, I learned that she was completely right. My therapist asked me to describe you, not the version I'd been telling people about, fragile, dependent, lost without me, but the real you, the woman you actually were. I couldn't do it. 10 years later, and I realized I'd never actually known you. I'd only known what I needed you to be. I heard you got married, that you run major international projects, that you're exactly the person you told me you could become, back when I said you were delusional for thinking you could survive without me. I was the delusional one. I thought making someone need me was the same as being loved. I thought your dependence proved my worth. I thought, God, I thought so many things that were really just fear dressed up as protection. You said I was afraid of you. You were right about that too. I was terrified of what you'd become if I stopped controlling the narrative. Turns out, you became everything I was too small to handle. I'm not writing to ask forgiveness. I don't deserve it, and I don't think you need to give it. I'm writing because you're the only person who ever told me the truth about myself, and I spent 10 years hating you for it instead of learning from it. I'm trying to learn now. It's slow. It's hard. Most days I fail. But I'm trying because the alternative is becoming the man who dies alone, wondering why every woman who ever loved him eventually left. I saw Lauren recently. She's engaged to someone else, a teacher apparently, someone who lets her be loud and messy and wrong sometimes. She looked happy, happier than she ever looked with me. That's when I understood. It wasn't that she was too weak for me, or that you were too fragile, or that any of the other women were too sensitive. It was that I needed them to be those things. I needed them weak so I could be strong. I needed them small so I could feel big. And the thing is, you were never weak. You were just young and kind and willing to believe that love meant accepting someone else's management. But eventually, you grew strong enough to see through it. And instead of celebrating that, instead of being proud that the woman I claimed to love had become powerful, I resented it. I resented you for outgrowing the cage I'd built. I don't know if you think about me. I hope you don't, honestly. I hope I'm just a brief chapter in a much larger story, one that you closed completely and moved past without looking back. But if you do think about me sometimes, about us, about what happened, I want you to know that you were always enough. More than enough. The problem was never you. It was always me, needing someone to be less so I could feel like more. I'm sorry I tried to make you small. I'm sorry I told you you'd never survive without me. I'm sorry I made you believe that needing help and being weak were the same thing. You survived, you thrived, and I've spent 10 years waiting for you to come back, to prove I was right, to validate my version of our story. You never did. And that, your absolute refusal to diminish yourself again, to return to someone who never saw you clearly, that's the closure I didn't know I needed. I hope you're happy. I hope your husband knows what I couldn't, that loving you means celebrating your bigness, not managing it. I hope you never think of me at all. Goodbye, Olivia. Thank you for being brave enough to leave. Nathan. I read the email twice, then closed my laptop. James was in the kitchen, cooking dinner, humming something off-key and cheerful. I walked up behind him, wrapped my arms around his waist, and breathed in the warm, safe smell of our life together. Everything okay? He asked, and everything's perfect. And it was. Nathan's apology didn't change anything because I hadn't been waiting for it. His understanding didn't heal me because I'd already healed myself. His regret didn't validate my choices because my choices had never needed his validation. He'd spend the rest of his life processing what he'd lost, learning slowly what I'd known since the moment I'd awakened in my younger body. That strength isn't the absence of need, and love isn't the management of weakness, and survival isn't something you do for someone else's approval. I'd already won, not by making him suffer, but by refusing to let his cruelty define my worth, by choosing peace over proof, by walking away and never looking back. He'd wait forever for my return, and I'd never come. That was his punishment, not my anger, but my indifference, not my need for revenge, but my complete and utter wholeness without him. I deleted the email without responding. That evening, James and I walked along the river near our home. The sunset painted everything gold and soft. the kind of light that makes the world look like a beginning instead of an ending. "What are you thinking about?" James asked, his hand warm in mine. "Nothing important," I said. "Just grateful." "For what?" "For death that taught me life. For pain that taught me power. For the man who said I'd never survive alone, proving himself catastrophically wrong with every breath I took without him. For the second chance I'd been given to choose myself first, completely without apology. For the quiet victory of becoming someone who didn't need to be seen to know her worth, didn't need to be chosen to know her value, didn't need someone else's regret to know she'd made the right choice. But I didn't say any of that. I just smiled and said, "For this, for us, for choosing well." He kissed my temple, understanding without needing explanation, loving without needing control. And I walked forward into my beautiful, hard-won life, leaving Nathan exactly where he belonged, alone in his regret, waiting for a return that would never come, learning too late what I'd always known. I was always strong enough. I just needed to stop letting other people tell me otherwise. The river reflected the dying light, turning everything to liquid gold. Somewhere behind us, in a life I'd left completely, Nathan was reading my silence, and understanding finally that some departures are permanent, some lessons arrive too late, some losses are meant to be carried alone. But I wasn't thinking about him. I was thinking about tomorrow, about the project I'd start next week, about the life James and I were building, one where neither of us had to be small, where love meant expansion rather than containment, where my size was celebrated rather than managed. I was thinking about how strange it was that dying had taught me how to live, that the end of one story had become the beginning of another, that the worst moment of my existence had contained within it the seed of my liberation. I was thinking about second chances, and how rare they are, and how thoroughly I'd claimed mine. And I was thinking, as we turned toward home with the last light fading behind us, that Nathan's wait would outlast him, that he'd spend his remaining years looking back while I kept moving forward, that his regret would compound while my joy multiplied, that his punishment was simply the natural consequence of trying to cage something meant to fly. He'd said I'd never survive without him. He'd been wrong about so many things, but that was perhaps his greatest miscalculation. I hadn't just survived, I'd become extraordinary. And the most perfect revenge was that I'd done it all without thinking about him at all, without needing his acknowledgement, without requiring his regret, without giving him any space in the spacious, beautiful life I'd built from the ashes of the one he'd tried to contain. He'd wait until the end. I'd already moved on, and that simple, quiet truth was more powerful than any confrontation, any anger, any revenge I could have designed. I was free, and freedom, I'd learned, was the only victory that mattered.